We welcome our Nigerian viewers and viewers around the world. This is Business Week, where we offer unique insight into the economies around the continent, as well as zero in on the biggest news story in the world of business. I am Kelly Egiga, and I'm reaching you from Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital. The Nigerian economy is one of the largest in Africa, and since the late 1960s, it has been based primarily on the petroleum industry. But just how much progress has been recorded in terms of having a stable economy the past 62 years since we gained independence? Well, that conversation will take center stage in just a moment, but let's run you through some of the stories that made headlines earlier in the week.
The eighth and final budget presentation by President Muhammadu Buhari as his administration winds down in another 7 months. The President of the Senate commends both arms of government for the return of the budget cycle to between January and December in the last 3 years. Ahmed Lawan and Speaker Femi Gbajabiamila acknowledged the trouble with the nation's economy arising from dearth of revenue, but the massive stealing of crude, which has impacted negatively on the nation's economy, leaves much to be desired. They insist crude thieves are enemies of the country and should be treated as such.
The thieves have declared war on our country and our people. I strongly feel that we need to take the necessary measures to stop the thieves immediately. Otherwise, our economy will be completely devastated. Also, our efforts to provide the necessary infrastructure and diversification of the economy would both be thwarted. It is time to take drastic and desperate measures against the thieves.
It is the sense of the House of Representatives that those engaged in these activities are agents of economic sabotage, determined to bring our country to its knees. Therefore, our position is that their actions constitute treason against our country, for which they and their enablers, whoever they may be, must be held accountable to the fullest extent permitted by law.
For 55 minutes, President Muhammadu Buhari takes a prospective look at the efforts of his government at reshaping the country with the current budget, as well as projections for the coming year. Transformational investments in infrastructure tops the list of his administration's achievements. The president says a challenging global economy, high inflation, high crude oil prices, and Russia-Ukraine war have contributed to the nation's troubled economy. Nevertheless, he says government is determined to shore up its revenue from taxation and the internally generated revenues of MDAs.
Our interventions and reflationary measures have been very effective and impactful. We must, however, continue to work towards achieving much higher levels of growth, especially given our high population growth rate, so that the average Nigerian can truly feel the impact of planned economic growth.
The parameters for the proposed budget include oil price benchmark of $70 per barrel of crude, daily oil production at 1.69 million barrels per day, inclusive of condensates of 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day, exchange rate of 435.51 naira to US dollar, and a projected GDP growth rate of 3.75% and 17.16% inflation rate. The president also touched on the current ASU strike and renews his appeal to university teachers to return to class. He says education cannot be solely funded by the government.
In the determined effort to resolve the issue, we have provided a total of 470 billion naira in the 2023 budget from our constrained resources for revitalization and salary enhancements in the tertiary institutions.
As he makes his last budget presentation before the joint session of the 9th National Assembly, President Muhammadu Buhari is optimistic of a better Nigeria. Despite the current challenges, he appreciates the contributions of the media and the civil society community to the nation's growth.
Well, thanks for staying with us. This is Business Week. Let's get into a big conversation. Nigeria's most valuable resource is perhaps its deposit of petroleum. It is one of the world's largest suppliers of oil and is a member of OPEC. With 70% of Nigeria's workforce invested in agriculture, the nation is the largest exporter of yams and cassava, as well as a variety of other foodstuffs. But the economy has continued to struggle to keep up its title of Africa's largest economy with its dwindling oil production, low standard of living of many Nigerians, and the rising cost of goods and services. Well, this is largely the story the past 62 years. Let's get after it and dissect these issues with who better than the Chief Executive Officer of Kari Asset Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, who joins us from the Victoria Island area here in Lagos. Well, Mr. Chukwu, it's such a delight and pleasure to discuss Nigeria 62 with you at this time. Let's begin from a historical perspective, perhaps. Walk us through just how the Nigerian economy has performed through the years from the colonial era to post-colonial era.
The Nigerian economy has not actually experienced a very drastic change in terms of the productive base of the economy. In terms of productivity, in terms of sectorial productivity, we've seen some level of improvement. But in terms of core productive base, which is to say that the economy is still an extractive industry-oriented economy, because more than 90% of foreign exchange is still coming from the extractive industry. In the 60s, it was still an extractive industry-oriented economy, but it wasn't the same product that were being exported. At the beginning of our independence period, our major exports were cocoa, which is an extractive industry product, granite, palm oil, and then subsequently in the late 60s and early 70s, we began to export crude, which is also an extractive industry product. The basic thing is that we have not seen so much of benefication of these extractive industry products. Our export of raw materials are still the basic form. They come out from their natural form. We're still exporting crude without so much of refining. We're not exporting refined petroleum products. So in terms of the base, in terms of our export earnings, particularly export earnings, we are still an extractive industry-oriented economy. But if you look at the productive base of the economy, we've seen some level of diversification. We've seen a situation where agriculture, although it still remains the number one contributor to the GDP at about 23%, we've seen the telecommunications sector, the ICT sector account for about 18.4% of the GDP, which is now the second largest contributor to the economy. Then followed by trade at about 16%, and then you have manufacturing sector at about 8%. And then before you now have the oil and gas sector or the mining and extractive industry sector that had about 6% contribution to the GDP. So in terms of contribution to the GDP, we've seen an improvement in terms of structure to an economy where you have a reasonable contribution from the service industry. I did mention that ICT account about 18.4% of the GDP. In terms of per capita income, I think our per capita income when we got independence was less than $1,000. Today, our per capita income is about $2,200, which is $2,200. So you can see we've seen an increase of about 100%. But in terms of what the world has witnessed, countries that we are at $235, like China, is now at about $10,000 per capita income. So if you now want to compare Nigeria to other countries, then you will see that the economy has actually grossly underperformed. I think on average and on a balance, we'll say the export earnings, source of export earnings remain extractive. In terms of productive base, we've seen some level of diversification.
Mr. Chukwu, precisely before the advent of crude oil exploration and even exploitation in the oil-producing zones and region of the country, Nigeria had a thriving economy. But how would you perhaps describe the switch and transition from a strong agricultural growth hub in the continent to depending solely on oil and crude?
Well, what I would say is that if you are looking at the flip side, which is the negative side of it, the transition from a productive economy where we were actually producing agricultural products and exporting them to a major export product, which is more of a passive income. where there is little input that you need to make to be able to produce a product and export. So what has happened is that it has negatively affected the level of, call it productivity in the economy. It has changed the orientation of particularly the public service, where tax used to be the dominant source of revenue for government at different levels of the country. Now we've seen situations where handouts or share of proceeds of export of crude has become the dominant source of earnings for the three layers of government. And that shift in terms of a productive-based earnings economy or a productive economy to an economy that is more of a rent-seeking economy has had a major adverse effect on, one, the contract between the public service and the citizens in terms of the commitment of the public service operators to focus on creating economic environment that will encourage productivity or that encourage investment.
Let me put this across to you, because in the last 2 years, we have witnessed two major events all around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, in 2020, the Nigerian economy shrank by 1.8%, its deepest decline since 1983. Talk us through the impact of this global economic crisis on the Nigerian economy.
Okay, starting from the COVID impact in 2000, of course, you know, there was a global lockdown. The country was not an exception. We saw the economy contract by about 1.9% in 2020 as a result of COVID. We saw productive activities almost slow down to a halt. We saw crude oil price drop at some point about $20 per barrel. So that impact meant that Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings declined precipitously, beyond the fact that we also locked down the economy and shut down productive activities. So COVID had a very negative impact on the economy. Many households were struggling to survive. The government had to even implement some level of handout to support the most vulnerable in the society. Now, fast track to 2022, February 24, 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine. And then what happened subsequently is that that led to supply bottlenecks as it constrained export of refined petroleum products as well as crude from Russia, as well as constrained food export from Ukraine as a result of the lockdown or shutdown of the Black Sea port. The impact on us was that we saw a sharp increase in food inflation because if you look at the even August 2022 inflation figures, food inflation had moved to about 23.12%, driven largely by the increased price of bread, which is a wheat byproduct, and wheat is largely produced between Russia and Ukraine. We also saw a major uptick in core inflation, where as a result of increase in the price of refined petroleum products. I had mentioned that the war constrained the export of crude and refined petroleum products from Western countries. So Nigeria had the unfortunate experience of suffering both the increase in food prices because we already have our endogenous factors, challenges, to the extent that the food producing belts of the country, which are the Northeast, North Central, and the Northwest, have been witnessing a heightened level of insecurity, which has made it impossible for the food produced locally to displace the expensive food imports from the Western countries.
Food prices have also risen steadily in the country for some years now due to the effects of climate change and even the pandemic, which I mentioned earlier, and widespread insecurity as well. But in February this year as well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, commodity prices have also soared, affecting the ability of millions of Nigerians to meet their basic needs. Can I just ask you, just how hard is inflation biting here in the country at this time?
Okay, you know, when we talk about inflation, Nigerians, for you to appreciate why Nigerians are really taking, where the Nigerians are really hurting because of inflation rates, because your inflation measured year-on-year increase change in price levels. And if we just look at this year's change in price level, which is August inflation figure about 20.52%, you won't get a full message. To appreciate why Nigerians are hurting when it comes to increase in average price of commodities is when you now step back a bit and look at what was the inflation figure for August 2021. Inflation figure for August 2021 was about 17.01%. And because you're measuring inflation year on year, so it then means that the inflation figure for August 2022 is using August 2021 as a base. So, and you have had another increase of 20.5%. In effect, between August 2020 and August 2022, an average household has suffered a diminution in the value of their income by 37.5%. And if you consider the fact that you can only afford now about 62.5% of what you used to afford 2 years ago, so you can now understand why it's hurting most Nigerians, because that's for you to appreciate that on average, an average household has lost about 40% of the purchasing power of their income. So if you were actually earning something like 100,000 naira a month 2 years ago and your salary has not increased over the past 2 years, today you are effectively earning about 67,500 naira. And there's just no way you can afford the same quantity of goods and services you afforded 2 years ago. And that's for you to understand why inflation is hurting Nigerians.
All right, Mr. Chukwu, I'd like to put this across to you because some months ago, a headline from various Nigerian media outlets captured the fact that Nigeria is broke as debt payment is exceeding our revenue. The topic, of course, dominated discussions and even social media, schools, private and public sector circles. Would you subscribe to the argument that Nigeria is broke, especially as we continue to spend heavily or a huge amount of money, which is about 118% revenue on our debt servicing, meaning the country is also borrowing to service debt?
Well, we are not broke as per broke into pieces, but we have a very precarious fiscal situation. If you consider the fact we have grown our total national debt about $103 billion, out of which over 40 billion is foreign currency debt. And remember that when we exited the Paris debt club, what we paid was about $36 or $32 billion. So in effect, we have accumulated back as much as we paid then. But the cost of the matter is not even total size of the debt. The critical factor is debt service to revenue. Over time, because our revenue has not grown, debt service has continued to increase. And according to IMF, this year, the minimum we will have is that we're going to have 105% of debt service to revenue, which means we're going to spend entire federal government revenue on debt and borrow another 5% of the amount we generated to pay additional interest payments. And remember, you're not talking of principal repayment, you're talking of debt service, you're basically talking of interest payments. So, so in effect, the government, if the government was to be a private sector operator or a household, a business operator, then we would have been in a very difficult situation, because today all your banks would have called your debt, because as it stands today, you're not earning enough revenue to pay to service your debt. You're going to rely on additional borrowing to pay your debt. That's where the problem is. So and when people talk about debt to GDP ratio, I say that's not the core of the issue. For you to measure debt to GDP, you have to look at the productivity of the economy. What matters is how productive the economy, what kind of revenue the government is generating. So to address that, a couple of things the government need to do, and I think the minister alluded to that she doesn't think the government will have the headroom for capital expenditure this year, given the kind of provisions they've made. And they are projecting that they will only generate about 8.46 trillion naira, which means government is projecting that they will borrow 11.3 trillion naira next year. If they do that, then that will further add to our debt stock, and then will further add to our debt service. And that would simply mean that we're going to get to a point where we may not even be able to borrow enough to supplement the revenue in terms of meeting our debt service obligations.
Well, fascinating insight. I also wonder perhaps what you think is the difference between the economic issues that we have at hand at the moment and the issues we had 60 years ago or over 60 years ago.
Well, the difference then was our population was much smaller. As I'd say, if you look at the figures of Nigerian population in 1963, which is the most validly accepted population census as at then, our entire population was only 55.6 million people in Nigeria. Today, Based on the World Bank and World Poverty Clock, our population is about 218 million. So our population has more than quadrupled over the past 63 years. In terms of productive base, we've not grown the productive base of the economy as much as the population has grown. And that's why you're having this level of unemployment. That's why you're having little improvement in the standard of living of Nigerians. Of course, in terms of per capita income, we've seen improvement from about less than $1,000 to about 2,200. But if you look at the purchasing power of dollar, 1960 and the purchasing power of dollar today, you will actually see in terms of real value, if you look at the constant figure, constant rate of the currency, you will realize that on average household in 1960 was obviously better off than average household in today's Nigeria. So that's the challenge in terms of growing the economy. Like I did mention earlier, countries that had lower per capita income in 1960 today have 4 times or 5 times our per capita income, despite the fact that they have a much bigger population than Nigeria does.
Only just yesterday, on Friday, President Muhammadu Buhari presented the 2023 appropriation bill before the Senate and, of course, the House of Representatives. When you take a look at that budget, what worries you the most?
Well, the greatest concern I have is in terms of the budget deficit. I mean, if you expect to raise about 8.46 trillion naira, I don't see why anybody should be budgeting as much as 19.76 trillion naira. Second factor that I worry about is the basic assumptions. You're assuming that you produce about 1.6 million barrels of crude daily. Today, like we all know, the crude production in August was just about 972,000 barrels a day. And we've not done up to 1.4, 1.5 million barrels a day in the past 2 years. So that, for me, it looks optimistic. And once that assumption on volume is wrong, then it becomes difficult to achieve the target revenue projections. And if you don't achieve the target revenue projections, you're going to see suffer severe deficit that will actually worsen our borrowing challenges, our debt challenges.
Well, Mr. Chukwu, we are absolutely pressed for time. But let me just put this across to you, because there will be a new leadership in 2023. But the World Bank has lowered its economic growth forecast for Nigeria next year to 3.2% from the 3%, citing citing a slowdown in global growth, the war in Ukraine, and of course including the declining demand from China for commodities produced in the continent. What's your economic outlook and projections for 2023?
As a people, if you're talking about the citizens, what I would say that the citizens' duty today is just basically to, among the contenders for the office of the president or elected positions, citizens have a duty to choose wisely. That, for me, is where the citizens' role ends. Then once we have elected anybody, we need to hold the person accountable, and we need to hold them responsible for the commitment they made to us in terms of their policy presentation, or what they call their political agenda. So once we do that, we've done our own role. And if the leaders fail to meet the commitment of the contract they signed with us, then we have a duty to ask them to leave or to vote them out of the next election. So the citizens have our only responsibility is to accept our civic duties responsibly. Well, you see, the current government has limited time left. It's just about 7 months left, of which the next 5 months will be an election period, after which the other 3 months or so will be a transition period. There's a limit to what they can do. The best they can do is to conduct a free and fair election and bequeath on Nigerians the authority to change governments. The second thing they can do is take out some of those policy limitations, like the issue of subsidy, so that they don't pass such social burdensome responsibility to a new government.
Absolutely. Fantastic conversation. Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Asset Management, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, would like to thank you most kindly for your views, insights, and perspectives on the program today.
My pleasure.
All right, and just before the end of business week, here is my final thoughts on the program. The economy, whether Nigeria's or any other economy around the world, is the basis of every society. When the economy is stable, the society absolutely develops. That's my final thoughts on the program this week. Think about it. And that does it for us on this special edition of Business Week. Thanks for watching. I am Kelly Egiga, and I'll see you again next time. Bye now.